This meeting. Yeah. What do you think about the podcast?
Well, he's
What do you guys think?
yeah, he's a financial analyst, and basically what he's looking at is a price series, the price series as it's reacting, a financial price series reacting to various events. So there's a very strong tradition of technical analysis in finance, and he's part of that.
Okay, so there's. I hear what you're
So
saying. You're saying that. I mean, he didn't really mention technical analysis, but I get that that's his background as a financial analyst.
that's what he's doing, though. Okay, so in short-term analysis, in technical analysis, there is very little analysis of the underlying value of an asset that's being traded. What there is there's an analysis of the changes in that value, the changes in the market that are causing changes in the price. So if you like, you assume that there is this value because you see it. It does exist. So it's not a hard assumption to make. And if you're a short-term trader, what you're interested in is the change in the supply and demand in the relatively short time. And there's a tremendous amount of work that's gone on in that. And there's a lot of academic work, and there's a much greater amount of work by practitioners. So crypto, Bitcoin especially, is a financial asset right now. It's traded, and it can be exchanged for other financial assets. And it's got this incredibly rich data series. And so you can do all of the analysis that you could do for any of the other financial instruments that are available to investors and speculators. And of course, to traders and brokers.
I mean, from that perspective, it would seem like he would be. He's not of the mindset of through all the volatility, it's worth it at all, because as he says throughout the podcast, it's going to zero, and avoid it like he doesn't use the words avoid it like the plague, but his general sentiment is that he avoids it like the plague, and that the only person that's invested in it in his like immediate circle is his son.
Well, volatility is a very interesting thing. I mean, if an asset is volatile, and if one can understand the market in the short term, one can make a tremendous amount of money on that volatility. So Bitcoin and crypto in general are volatile, and so people can make money on that if they can do good short-term predictions. And if you are making a market in that currency or in that asset, then you can make money on that as well. You bid low and you ask high, and you maintain your own little inventory. And as long as you have a good idea about where it should be trading, then you can make money by providing liquidity for the market. So it's a fascinating market. It's unregulated, and so one can test various hypotheses about it, and it's really interesting.
I mean, yes, I would agree it's interesting, but I mean, I guess what I'm looking for in responding to Peter Schiff's perspective is the perspective that it should be avoided like the plague. In so many words, once again, he doesn't use those exact words, but that's his sentiment, that he doesn't touch it, that even when it was gifted to him, he thought it was a joke. He didn't care to remember the seed phrase for the wallet of gifted Bitcoin. So yeah, the question I'm really digging for an answer for is the sentiment that it's going to zero and it should be avoided. Like, do you agree, disagree? Like, what's your take on it?
Well, yes, I do believe that it should, and probably in the long term is going to zero. But that's with a lot of caveats, okay? If one treats it as a currency, then clearly it is not a good medium of exchange. It is not a good unit of count. Um, Obviously, it's not a good medium of exchange because it's expensive to use, and it relies on various platforms that are unregulated. There's been a tremendous amount of theft and losses of the currency relative to the amount that there is in circulation. So the question is it a good store of value? Is it a good financial speculative asset? And on one side, you say, well, why should anybody ever want this? Okay. It's very easy to replicate, right? On one level, it's easy to replicate because it's open source. It's just coding, right? So the only thing that makes your Bitcoin that you program up different from the Bitcoin that was started in 2009 is your Bitcoin, your cryptocurrency, which is identical to that because you have the open source code and you just program it up. The only difference is that yours doesn't go back to 2009, right? There is not these every 10 minutes there's a new block that's generated, which there isn't that tradition, if you like. So if this is not a currency in the sense of a good medium of exchange, a good unit of count, if it's just a store of value, then what is that value in that tradition? So the value in that tradition, I think, is the same value as, if you like, in a Picasso, right? This is a work of art. And it's a work of art that goes back to, with probability one, you can prove it, goes back to those original blocks that were minted back in those original currencies that were minted when the original blocks were closed, starting in 2009. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this isn't art that you can appreciate. You can't look at it, right? It's just zeros and ones. So it's not art in that it's beautiful. It's art in that it is essential. If you believe that it is essential, of essence, the essence of what? The essence of the new age, the essence of the digital society. So in the same way that, you were with us in Istanbul, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember going to that beautiful palace?
I remember going to the Blue Mosque.
No, yes, the Blue Mosque. That was absolutely amazing. We went to the and I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly. The Tokapi. I'll have to look that one up. Anyway, it was the palace where the sultans of the Ottoman Empire resided. Okay, beautiful palace. And they had in it relics, religious relics. And among those religious relics was the staff of Moses. So this is a guy that probably didn't even exist, okay? But they had his staff, right? And they also had the beard and the mantle of the prophet. So this is a man that definitely existed and that founded the religion of Islam. And there it is, the mantle of the prophet. So these are relics, these are religious relics in the same way that a piece of the true cross is a religious relic. The cross in which
this Bitcoin as a testament of the time.
A testament to the time, exactly. And you can have a piece of it. Now, the question, though, is exactly how much of a piece of it is enough for you? Now, if it's not going to generate cash flow except by other people buying it, right? Then unfortunately, it is subject to the greater fool's problem. And the greater fool's problem is that you've got to find a fool that will pay a greater price than you paid for it in order to give you a return. And if you think how that works, the question is, how much of this religious relic do you wish to have? Now, this thing can be split into Satoshis, right? And a Satoshi is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, right? So the question, and I mean, right now, that's something like 4% of one, its value is about 4% of 1 US cent. Now, do you need for your veneration of this age anything more than a couple of cents of Bitcoin? So that's why I think that Bitcoin's price is going to zero.
Right, because as you said, it's open source, so anyone can replicate it. So the idea of its novelty is replicable, even though you're buying into something that was novel. Like as much as anyone can replicate the Bitcoin code, the code that you're buying into, that's being mined is a specific Bitcoin code that isn't some random person's. It's the code that was originated in 2009.
Satoshi Nakamoto. Right. It's his.
So I get everything you said. I guess to make it even more pertinent to today, right now, end of February 28th, with the upswing that some people believe is in some part due to it being sent potentially to Ukraine. So this circumventing of the SWIFT system, or not, I don't know if it's circumventing, but at least somewhat more efficient than what exists in SWIFT right now, which is that it takes about 3 to 5 days, I think, to for a transaction of any large amount to go through, at least. So I get the lack of utility, true sense of utility, because of what you mentioned of greater fool's theory, where the value is only propped up by the next fool buying into it. But I'm wondering about the utility of just sending something digital. So if we're saying it's this piece of artwork that one fool has propped up its value because another fool has bought it, the sending of this Satoshi to Ukraine as a support and as something that is being transacted for financial gain, in financial support. I mean, is that not valuable?
Okay, so what you're saying is it useful as an international currency? Is that what you're saying?
That it's being used right now, it's demonstrating that use, and seemingly it's being propped up on some level narratively, even if it's not say like it's hard to gauge whether this bump is in fact in any way, shape, or form directly related to.
Okay, so take a step back, please. Which bump are we talking about
right now? Because as of past day, the prices has increased in Bitcoin, in Satoshis. The US dollar to Bitcoin exchange rate had, like, that was, I don't know, as of this morning, I don't know, last I checked, it was about $40,000, 41,000. And the narrative that's currently being circulated is that's in part due to wanting to send value to Ukraine. And so there's this greater fool, I guess, that's buying into Bitcoin and sending it to Ukraine. So I'm wondering, given that, well, so, US dollars, we should just send US dollars. Well, why are we sending Bitcoin? So this is a question, I think, that is worthwhile to look into.
Okay, so when the crisis initially hit, and I'm talking about now going back a week, right? What was the reaction of Bitcoin? Do you remember the value of it?
Well, I mean, I mean, I wouldn't say right. So any crisis, anything that, yeah, it plummeted in line with stocks plummeting. Everything plummeted.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, everything doesn't necessarily plummet during a crisis, right? So that you're right, stocks tend to plummet, right? But and bonds tend to plummet because interest rates are going up. What gold tends to be the other way, right? So when some people were talking about Bitcoin as a digital gold, and so then one would expect then that Bitcoin would be treated by people as the last best medium of exchange. The idea being that the gold would always be available for swapping into other things. That's what a medium of exchange does for you. You could always swap the gold. And that's why it was so attractive. It was light, one could carry it on one's person. You can conceal it, push it up your nose or other crevices, and take it across international borders, whatever, in enough value that you could then subsist on the other side of the border, and you could survive a frisking of your body. So gold typically moves up when there's a crisis. And when the crisis initially hit, this moved more in sync with stocks and bonds than it did with gold, right? So there's, I think, at least more than one thing happening here. I think that if I were a Ukrainian in Kiev heading for the Polish border, and this is where most of the humanitarian crisis is right now in terms of people moving, I would not think, where can I load up my Bitcoin wallet so I can be a successful refugee? I think I would like gold and not like Bitcoin. And the reason why, of course, is that you need to have, good Wi-Fi, a nice internet connection. You have to have this, at least a cell phone that remembers a charged cell phone that remembers your account number, right? And probably it's not in your head, right? So 20% of Bitcoins have been lost. That's a huge number, right? And they've been lost. Why? Because people throw out the hard drives, or things crash, so it is not that reliable a last bolt storehouse of value and medium of exchange. If it were your face, if that was what was being encoded, or your retina, some biometric, then I would find it more credible. But if it is, or your DNA, but if it's just, you got to remember that code in your hard drive, then I don't find that a credible digital gold.
Right. So, I mean, given that there are centralized exchanges and wallets that encode it to your fingerprint, where you can access your wallet through either a password of your choosing. I mean, it's usually both, actually. You have as you said, yes, your cell phone that texts you. Like, this is how I access my Binance, where I say I want to access my wallet to log into Binance. They text me a secret passphrase, and I just copy that. And once they text it to me, then I feed it back to prove that it's me. So it's not an account getting hacked. So in that case, I'm not having to worry about the 12C password that I could lose. But then I'm still at the whim of Binance. Binance could lock me out. So there's kind of like a give and take, where it's kind of like accessing my bank. My bank could still Um, I mean, so in also in just a caveat to um, whether it's gold or even cash, there's these there's the awareness of not quite a bank run. I don't know if that's exactly what happened in Ukraine, but definitely massive lineups of all these people trying, to get money out of a bank, like a bank. So you obviously you would like to have an efficient system and to say whether the bank is more or less efficient um, than being able to send your Bitcoin back and forth or send gold back and forth. I mean, I think it's not a easy argument to make because of the greater accessibility. Like everyone tends to have a smartphone. Everyone there tends to be a cafe with Wi-Fi. So this inaccessibility to the internet or the technology, I think it is on ever decreasing, is on a decline. That yes, there is this initial pain point of like if I don't have a smartphone, if I don't have Wi-Fi, then theoretically me carrying around bars of gold could be more portable somehow. I guess. But I think there's also the added narrative of just our current generation, whether it's Gen Zers or millennials, where the call it what we said earlier, that there's just this artistic element, but with that artistic element, there's just a greater interest in owning Bitcoin over owning cash. This idea that you are one step removed from the government is narratively, what do you call it, attractive to to um, to our generation far more than gold is. I think gold is narratively seemingly, kind of like analog, kind of like it is. It feels to be analog. It doesn't feel to be as accessible. And whether you want to say this feeling is not accurate, I think it's still a large push into what's trending and cool, and it's it can seem ridiculous, but I think it's more than just an artistic thing. It's if people believe it and call them fools, the belief is valuable.
Absolutely.
I know that equally baby boomers will make, or like baby boomers, but let's say there is the narrative of like, well, people believe tulips were this crazy valuable thing, and then look where that went. The thing with the tulip thing, at least, is you don't have this whole blockchain ecosystem where people are actively building on the blockchain. So let's say that yes, theoretically, Bitcoin not having any direct use, we could argue that there could be another currency, another form of crypto that would improve on everything that Bitcoin does. Because I know we had a previous conversation a few months back where we had mentioned that Bitcoin is in technology, at least in coding, something that is you feel to be akin to BlackBerry. And really uses BlackBerry. I don't think we're there yet, and I think we can, just like the way we saw the phasing out of BlackBerry, we will see the phasing out if this, like, if that does happen, if Bitcoin does phase out, yeah, I think that transition won't be as sudden and as jarring as it just plummeting to zero tomorrow. I think much like a technology that is phased out, you'll be like, okay, well, this is the next best thing. So I guess the question with this whole ramble I have is the true value that we're trying to get at, because I guess I started this whole conversation asking you about thoughts on Peter Schiff's take on it going to zero, and we've outlined at least both the artistic element, the coding element, the open source. We've outlined the reasons as to your belief that it will go to zero because it's dated technology. I've said my piece when it comes to at least what our generation believes to our generation. Let's say the youth of today, and my belief that will have greater affinity for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency than gold. is there any in between here? Because I guess you had mentioned, I think before we even started this Zoom, or while we were planning it, that the timeline in which it goes to zero could be a lifetime. So, like, on some level, that statement of it going to zero, I mean, sure, but like,
Who cares?
like, yeah.
Yes, there is an element of who cares, right?
Like, there's got to be more than just saying it's going to zero. Like, yeah, it's artistic. It's not a great currency, but whether we think it's a good store of value or not, it is being used as such, and we can call them all great of fools, but it's not diminishing what's actively happening currently. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to unearth more of a nuanced statement. And it's going to zero. Avoid it like the plague. Like, I feel like at this stage in 2022, like, is there more to add to this, or is it just kind of going to be this like this separation of, like, not church and state, but of a traditionalist idea? And I'm trying to unearth more than like, to that statement you said earlier, where it was, yeah, it could be a lifetime if it going to zero. I don't know. Is there more to that you want to add, or?
Well, not really. No, I think that is good, that it may take a very long time. There's a lot of people that are interested in it, and there is a huge industry that is developed around it. And so, you're right. It might take a very long time, or, maybe, I don't know, there'll be a massive solar flare, and the internet will go down. And when the internet comes back up, people say, well, maybe Bitcoin wasn't such a great thing after all, even though we can still resurrect a few blocks here and there, whatever the effect was. But I think that you mentioned a couple of things. One was, you mentioned convenience. You mentioned that you can always get onto your Bitcoin, right? But you're getting through a platform. It's not something that itself is intrinsically more safe than the bank, and than a commercial bank. And I think that one can argue that it is probably less safe, given the history of Bitcoin, the amount of platforms that have disappeared. You just have to go back to the original one, when Mt. Gox went down. It was kind of a shocker. That's quite a number of years ago. But basically, none of these exchanges are regulated. And that means that all of these exchanges could be subject to fraud. And probably, given human nature, many of them will be. So there's a way around it. Of course, you could become a full client. But I think that becoming a full client is not very practical. What you'd have to do then is you'd be downloading that 150 plus megabytes every 10 minutes and being part of the voting system onto which is the largest chain in the blockchain, so that you validate which block, in fact, is the next one that actually goes forward. So that is an intensive requirement. I mean, 150 meg, it's not, how much is a movie? It's more than 150 meg, right? But it's not a lot of data, but it's more than you'd like to be doing all the time with every 10 minutes on your telephone. So it's a requirement that means that you are likely to want to go through an exchange, so you don't actually have to deal with the clunkiness of Bitcoin. So going through an exchange, you're going through an unregulated financial intermediary, where that particular industry has had some past fraud and probably will have fraud in the future. So the question is, would you rather go through that intermediary, or would you rather go through, for international payments, a central bank intermediary? And I realize that you, of your generation, don't like central banks, and many in my generation don't like central banks. But the fact remains that in general, central banks have proved to be more reliable in recent decades than private, especially private non-regulated organizations. So I think that so the question is, well, can I use my central bank digital currency? And the answer is, wait a couple of years, because last year in China, the People's Bank of China became the first the central bank to test run its central bank digital currency. They had a couple of billion renminbi of it. The current Federal Reserve Board is now working on DM. That's why the Swiss are no longer on DM, because the Fed has come in. So the Federal Reserve and at least 40 other central banks of the world are considering issuing central bank digital coins. So with a central bank digital coin, you could be making transactions for nothing across international borders, and the latency would be much less than Bitcoin, and the volatility would be much less than Bitcoin. So would you want to work with a central bank digital coin, or would you like to say, well, because I am basically sort of an anarchist mindset or a decentralized mindset, I'd much rather work with something that is non-official. But the difficulty of something that is non-official is that you're more likely to lose your money than not. So that brings me back to, well then what is the value of Bitcoin? Let's go back to Bitcoin then. I think the value of Bitcoin is precisely that it was the beginning. It's precisely the fact that it is the genesis. We can go right back to the genesis block, and every one of those blocks has the hashing of the previous blocks. So this tradition, and that's what it is. It's a veneration of tradition. And so the question is, what is the value of that veneration of tradition such that people in the future will continue to value Bitcoin? And if it is sufficient to say, well, these guys don't want a Satoshi, these guys want a whole bit on the Bitcoin. So maybe then there'll be bidding up and down, continuing trading in that. And so that this value will continue into the future past our lifetimes. And it is possible. You're right. It is totally whether or not you believe, not just you, but millions of people believe that having that tradition, and that's what it is, it's tradition. Having that tradition is valuable. So it's the tradition that we're setting up of the digital age. And arguably, the best token of the digital age that we've come up with is precisely Nakamoto's Bitcoin.
I mean, the one thing you had said about the trustworthiness of banks, I mean, just going recently to the freedom convoys, where they were trying to shut down the Bitcoin wallets, but of course they were shutting down Bitcoin wallets, or shutting down the banks that were supplying, that were in essence somehow connected to those Bitcoin wallets. The idea isn't so much just anarchy; it's really as nefarious as just. I mean, this was actually something mentioned on the podcast with Peter Schiff, where I don't know if you reached this part of the podcast where they his father, Peter Schiff's father, this is just kind of an anecdote that goes in line with, because Peter Schiff's father wasn't an anarchist. Did you get to this part of the podcast?
I didn't get that. Sorry. Tell me the story.
So, I mean, the basic story to Peter Schiff's father is kind of sad. Is that Peter Schiff's father studied the law to such a sufficient degree, tax law, that he found that there was no, he was able to make a cogent argument for not paying his taxes, and he published a book on it. And this was one of the few books that has been banned in the United States. I've yet to check that myself, but I believe Peter Schiff when he said that. He has no reason to lie about it. So Peter Schiff's father was not an anarchist, but did not pay his taxes, and in doing so, got was pretty much died. He didn't have like a malice, a bone of malice in his body, but he died in his he died chained to his bed, handcuffed to his stretcher in the hospital. And it's a horrible story. But I bring up that anecdote, that story, side story, when it comes to anarchy or an individual choosing to live their own, quote unquote, sovereign life within society. I get that once you're in society, you sort of
Are not sovereign.
you're no longer, that sovereignty. You're already in this contractual agreement that you will pay for these fares. That being said,
People are social.
People want to know that the value they've accrued, they will not be that it won't just be taken from them, just like that. And that's the biggest fear for central currency. That given the data, any action you like to post, you put this thing online, could be argued as problematic, or argued against the state, or argued as terrorism. Any argument that can be made, and this was another part of the podcast that I appreciated, that like when it comes to going against the government, don't do it. You will lose. They will find a reason to make you an enemy of the state. And this isn't an anarchist point of view. This is just like, it's sound advice that it's not advantageous to try to argue against the government. And so with that perspective, that, given that you don't have to be a malicious person, you don't have to be a bad actor. You just take an action that is deemed to be bad on some level, as benign as it might be, and all of a sudden this idea of safety within a central currency goes the wayside very quickly, which is part of this sense of value back to Bitcoin, back to at least stores of value in a non-centralized currency, which I understand there's a narrative that exists, and it's a historical fact that there have been centralized exchanges in cryptocurrency that have been hacked, or more than hacked, they were run by bad actors, like full on. They were they ran off the Bitcoin, ran off with all the pillars of value. So that historical fact, I think, is just as salient, is just as prescient, is just as true as banks that equally are known to be not full of good actors. The idea that banks are too big to fail, that they'll do with your money as they see fit, and also that the return right now that you're getting from any bank is 0.1%. So the stores of value in currency, and this goes to a whole other narrative when it comes to inflation, that is necessity, is baked into the currency itself. To like, we've accepted that we should not be holding that much cash on hand if we want to preserve our wealth, which goes back to buying into gold. But then, not to make my arguments too rambly, because I guess the key point I just wanted to give a counterpoint to was this idea, and I brought up at the beginning of my rant just now, the freedom convoys, where granted that for them, they can be, not even everyone who attended protests necessarily were bad actors. There were bad actors there. There were people who were causing damage, but there were also plenty of people there who were just peacefully protesting. And so this lack of gray area, I think, becomes very dangerous. And that's where people, I think, are fearful the most. No different than, all it takes is for an individual to state that they don't want to be vaccinated, and now they're lumped in with the crazy.
Yeah. Okay, no, I understand that you wish to preserve your liberty, that you wish to be free, that you wish to have, certainly of your own body, you wish to have control over your own body. And so you don't want somebody to tell you to be vaccinated. I think that you're right, that that wish for liberty is part of the attraction of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin aspires to be something that is not centrally controlled. And so it's somehow or other, if you have your money in, you have your wealth in Bitcoin, somehow there's a feeling that it can't be taken away from you. Now, I don't believe that that's true. I think that any asset that you have, if you are subject to the constraints of law because you have committed you've broken the law, so that would be a good reason for grabbing you, or because other people have said you've broken the law and you haven't, which would be a bad reason for grabbing you. But if the authorities do grab you, they can get your Bitcoins almost as easily as they can get your other assets. So you don't have those numbers in your brain unless you're very good. Most of the numbers that you have are on your hard drive or in your telephone. So those can be accessed in the same way that your other assets can be accessed and held by the authorities who have decided to seize your assets. It's happened before, and it's going to happen with increasing regularity. So Bitcoin is no more safe than an account in the in the Grand Cayman, or in the British Virgin Islands. It can be accessed, although it's of course more difficult than accessing that lump of gold that you happen to have taken across the border in your mouth. Right? That's much easier. So I don't think that that just because the existence of your account is held in a decentralized way by this community of whatever it is, 10,000 computers. I don't think it's much. How many active full clients are there? I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that. But my guess is that 99% of people that are trading in Bitcoin are trading through exchanges. But the Bitcoin blockchain resides in a decentralized capacity. That is true. But I think that the ownership of the asset can be taken away from you simply because somebody gets your number, your account number.
I mean, when it comes to cold storage wallets, what's your awareness of that?
Pardon me? If you had a wallet, if you had a wallet and the wallet was on a biometric, on your own biometric, then presumably there would be difficulty. But then you've said that it's on a wallet, right? So the wallet is from an exchange, right? The exchange.
It's no longer on the exchange. It's purely just on your wallet. It's no longer being stored on the exchange itself. You can remove it from the exchange.
Well, I'd have to look at the specifications, but if it involves, if you're not one of the full clients, do you become a full client?
You don't have to be a full client. You don't have to be the miner to have access to the Bitcoin, because this is the idea of having cold storage wallets, where, and this is part of the, also the safety of certain exchanges, where they say not all exchanges have this, but a lot of them that are like Binance, they have cold storage, meaning that it's not just on a server, but it's backed up on their own devices, so that if the server goes down, if there's a solar flare, there is still backup um, that's able to prove what
Right, but
you have.
is it the street? Are you owning that Bitcoin through essentially a street name?
Is it through a street name? What do you mean by street name?
Well, essentially, it's a platform that is the full client.
No, it's not the platform that's the full client. It's the so the USB key that has. I mean, so how does the technology work? That's what we're trying to get to the heart. And I mean, is because is are we like the thing that I'm clarifying is it's not on a cloud service that we're worrying about it shutting down. Like what we're saying is this
No,
can
no,
be stored.
right. My thought is the RCMP comes to you and says, "I'm sorry, Owen, you owe back taxes, and because you didn't pay them because you said that you're not going to pay taxes, and so we're going to seize your assets."
Right.
And
So
then so they take your computer and your cell phone, and the computer and the cell phone, and they crack it because they can do these things. And then do they then have your Bitcoin?
no, because it's not.
Well, how do you no longer have your telephone?
You have your computer.
You,
You don't have your cell phone. But if you have a USB key, so you have there's Trezor and then there's
you no longer have your USB, right?
Well, I mean,
At
they would have to know. So for that to exist, they would have to know that you own a USB key. Like so,
right.
it's like gold basically to that extent, where it's like, well,
Right.
how do you know that you know he owns gold? So the question then becomes, what's easier to hide, gold or this
So
USB?
the USB key, the USB,
Yeah, USB key in this case is easier to hide.
but you can't take it into prison with you.
No, I mean, would you take? I guess you could take gold, but no, if you took gold, that's kind of shinier. I don't know, like. Where would you hide your gold? Where would you hide USB key?
Gold's there.
Right. So they rip out the tooth from your mouth. Like, I don't know. Like this is. I feel like we're splitting hairs at this point.
Okay. Okay, fine. Right. The next one that we have, so that was, is Bitcoin going to zero? The next one that you were going to do is, what does the Russian invasion of Ukraine have to do with the price of Bitcoin?
Well, I mean,
Do
we
you
kind
want
of
to do that in
mentioned.
a week's time?
We've discussed that already. We mentioned about one. I mean, there's the flip side to it. There's the Ukraine side, which is I think supportive, but then there's also the disadvantageous on some level side, which is, you know, I don't know to what extent Russia it has been cut off so far, but it's ever increasingly so. Um, not necessarily through the. I don't think Swift. They're not fully cut off from using Swift yet, for whatever reason. Um, but the argument, I don't think Russia is practicing this, but it would be advantageous for them to practice having some, like even if they were cut off, as they are being cut off by other banks, they have stores of value in Bitcoin. This has been a narrative that's been floating around. And so the question that you just brought up was, or we were mulling about, is how much does the current geopolitical crisis affect the price of Bitcoin? And obviously it
Right.
tanked it, but then it's seemingly recovering. How much it recovers, you know, who knows?
Okay, so that was, I mean, we had the idea, we had this idea of doing 3 questions. And the first question was, is Bitcoin going to zero? I think we sort of talked about that. Then we said that we'd do the second one. What does Russia's invasion have to do with the price of Bitcoin? I don't think that we actually talked about that. We just made a few references to it. I think that we can easily do something on that. You were talking about, I mean, presumably this isn't going to be just raw stuff that you put up. You do some editing. And then the final one is, then we think of one for not next week, but the week after. And what it's come up several times in your discussions. And so I think it's probably worthwhile thinking about it. Is Bitcoin inherently an inflation hedge?
Okay. Well, I mean, so you want to talk about that next week?
Well, no, I thought we could do the Russian one next week. And then the week after we could do the inflation hedge.
Okay. I mean, I'd be curious how much more you wanted to add to the
I haven't thought about it. I haven't thought about it. Right? So I did a little bit of thinking about, is it going to zero? Right? But I haven't thought about the Russians and the Ukrainians. And I didn't have the bit of information that you gave me over this recording. And that was that, in fact, although it went down initially, it's come back up again. And there's a narrative on that. So, and these narratives are extremely important for the short-term trader, right? Because if they get the narrative correct, and if they are able to anticipate the underlying change in demand or supply, then they can make a fortune. And that is the attraction of any speculative financial asset.
Just as a record, what or clarity, how much of the podcast did you actually listen to?
A tiny bit. Sorry. I was okay. So there was. I will look. I will really listen to it this time, right? But my book went back and forth several times. Okay, and it is now gone. I now will probably never see it again until it actually comes out in paper. I will honestly. But hang on. But the one that I was listening to was, which one was I listening to? And I thought I actually didn't.
I sent you one. The first one, I think the first clip I sent was a clip of it, and then there's the second one, which is the whole thing.
It was this guy, Tony, right? It was Tony, and I don't think it had anything on that on it. And I didn't just do a small part of it. I was doing large parts of it. That guy? Is it that guy?
1 second. So Tony was the third one. The first two. I'm referring to the first two.
Okay. Okay. I see. Okay, I didn't listen to that. I listened to Tony actually all the way through, and I thought this guy's just he's just market. I mean, it's short-term market. Okay, let me go back and listen to the first one. It's first two. Okay, I will do that for next week.
And with that, I'll send you one more that gives at least a counterpoint to Peter Schiff, because Peter Schiff, that makes more sense. Everything you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, I'm like, this isn't Peter Schiff that you're talking about. But
only 71 at the time. Could I go back and I do that and I say, oh, okay, this is what I got to do, and so I did that, and I didn't.
Okay, well, I'll send you one more. Not Tony. This is a different guy that I'll just send you one more conversation. It's about 40 minutes long. At least it'll balance. It'll be a more balanced approach, because there's Peter Schiff's take on it, and if you get to the point where you actually also hear his dad's story, I mentioned, it's just a grueling. It's a horrible thing. I mean, I think his dad probably, smart man that put one and one together in such a way that didn't serve him, and then he ended up being an enemy of the state, which is
right. Well, okay. The thing is, every society has laws. And you can make it, and you can say, well, this is evil, or this is controlling, but this is the truth. Every society that we've lived in, since we've been more than just one family at a time, and I think probably, even when we were monkeys in the trees, we were living in a society. I'm not sure if you remember those bands of monkeys that we were in Hong Kong. The thing is, we're social animals. We're social animals.
Like, how much can one have a sense of sovereignty in a society of law? And like that pushback, I think, is at a real tipping point in today's digital age, in the digital economy, where we have a greater capacity for sovereignty, for better or for worse. I mean, because it can equally prop up your megalomaniacs as much as it can prop up the individual who just wants some peace of mind. So, I mean, I get the rule of law kind of rules all, and with that rule of law ruling all, you have a ton of not just scapegoating, but people who are really good at manipulating the law, so it serves them. So I get the idea that we do our best to serve, to be of service, and unfortunately, there is a very, very clear narrative, not just a narrative, but yeah, it's a narrative. It's a clear conversation that existed for probably just as long as we've had monkeys. That the person at the top of the hierarchy that's controlling the laws is controlling the law in their favor, and unfortunately, that dichotomy of power becomes where this idea of service kind of falls to the wayside, because now service isn't one of the greater good, but the greater good for me. And so who's me? Is me the person who's creating the law, or is me the person that's just trying to, cow down to it? And so this narrative, this conversation doesn't get resolved. It just becomes not just, I mean, becomes this idea of sort of, we can play into the greater fools theory equally, where like I will agree because I've been told to agree, as opposed to like having some sense of critical thought.
No, I think that um, I think that one can honestly try to be positive influence within society and abide by the laws of society. I think that that is more consistent than saying, well, I'll take an anarchist view and I will not pay my taxes because it's basically oppression. I think if you take that, then you set up a conflict with society, and you're not going to win that conflict. People end up in prison and insane asylums because basically they flout social norms and laws consistently. So I think that it's better to try to get along with the society, spot the areas where you can make a difference to change things, and address those to change things for the better, rather than doing a blanket, well, I'm not going to pay my taxes. I can see how that might have landed him in a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, even though, I'm sure he was a good guy.
I think we're all good guys,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Uh,
obviously we could argue for the goodness of Putin, because he just wants Mother Russia back together again.
Absolutely right.
And at the cost. There's one thing to say, I'm a good person and I'm not doing anything. I'm a good person and I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to get my goodness across. So there's one that's very active in destruction, and one that's very passive and not actually doing anything. But then equally, because you're not doing anything, you become an enemy. And I believe that's probably the stance that his father took, unfortunately, which is, unfortunate that you can
Okay.
get attached to nothing.
So that's the one that I'll look at that one. That's the father son. Okay. And so when we come next week, and we're going to be doing the what does the Russian invasion have to do with the price of Bitcoin? We may be referring back to that as well.
Well, I mean, I've been referring to that in this conversation, but I can do it again, I suppose. Like,
okay.
This was something that this is where we had a bit of a conversational dissonance. You were talking about trading, short-term trading. I was talking about Peter Schiff. These two, the conversation didn't quite connect.
Okay.
What is this? Like this. I don't know how we're going to make that. I don't even know if I'll.
Okay. Well, this has probably been going for about an hour now. So you have you can do as much editing and chopping as you would like with this, and you can post it or not post it. But
because the point here is that this is to be shared, and as much as I think this was
we didn't know that we were going to do this until the last 10 minutes of the thing last week.
No, we didn't. But I was going to say, like, everything we've outlined here, we've already been, like, nothing we've said, I think, is very new. It's just, I think, further clarifying two different perspectives, both that I find to be equally, weighted with their validity. There's going to be tons of people, I think, until the cows come home, who will say that it is a tulip game, or whatever you want to call it, that it is not of real, Bitcoin is of no real worth until, I mean, it could be $100,000. And then like the as traders believe it will, once it peaks at 100,000, it might crash back down to 20 grand, 10 grand maybe. And then there'll be a bunch of people saying, see, I told you so. But like, if it still stays at 10,000 until we're dead, and if not, beyond our lives, then the question remains, like, at what point will those people who believed it were just tulips choose to relinquish that perspective? And I don't know if that will ever be the case. Like, I guess you can hold a perspective, until the cows come home.
Right.
It doesn't really matter, I suppose, but it's an interesting game of narratives.
Mhm.
I don't know. The goal here is to have this conversation, I suppose, and just to know that it can be had, as opposed to just kind of like blocking out, going la 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 la. Like, I think that tends to be more of, unfortunately, what tends to be what's happening today, where there's just more divisiveness and less of a conversation between two different opinions, which is, I think, unfortunate. So for that reason alone, I think this was bad.
Okay, sounds good. So next week we're doing the second question with a potential reference to Peter Schiff.
Yeah.
And the third, and is the third question, then, is Bitcoin inherently an inflation hedge? Is that the third question?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So that's the week after.
Sure, we can do that. I mean, this
Okay.
is, I guess, something we're just discovering. I genuinely thought we were going to get to all three questions today, but okay. So we're doing a week by week, question by question. Understood. And we'll reassess that after, I guess, next week, or I mean, a week from now. I mean, well, how did you actually, before we call it close? Like, how did you find this conversation? What were your
It's fun.
takeaways?
It's fun, right? I didn't think, before you asked me the question, will Bitcoin go to zero? I never thought of the beard of the prophet.
Okay, the beard, meaning what you had mentioned right earlier in the conversation.
Right.
So thinking
So
beard of the
now,
prophet, how does that help?
how does that help? Because it shows the value of Bitcoin in the new digital age. It's the best icon we have.
Well, I mean, it is one of many. I mean, we could.
Okay, so what would be a better one? An icon.
Any art, like you brought up Mona Lisa, you brought up, you could any.
Right, but they're not from this age. They're not from the digital age. This is entirely digital.
Right. So what you said, so the beard and prophet is the best. I don't know, like the beard and the prophet. That's like the best connection you could have. Like, how is the Mona Lisa or any other cultural artifact?
It's a cultural artifact, exactly. So it's the best cultural artifact for the new digital age.
Right.
And if it is always appreciated as the best cultural artifact for the new digital age, then in the digital age, it will never go to zero. And I didn't think about that until you asked the question, will it go to zero?
That's an interesting way to reframe your own argument, or to add greater breadth to it. So if it is the best cultural artifact of the digital age, then it will never go to zero. Okay.
During the digital age.
During the digital age, right? So if, like,
so obviously we do go through different ages, and I don't know how long what we're calling the digital age will last. That's why I gave the idea of the solar storm.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's worthwhile to ponder over.
So I wouldn't have thought about that if you hadn't have asked me to. You asked me whether I enjoyed the session. My answer was yes, because I thought about something that I didn't think about before. And it takes us back to Istanbul.
Right. Well, it's been good. Been productive. I appreciate it. Thank you. Love you, Dad. And
Have
I
you
guess
gone? Right.
I'll look over the footage and see what I can how I want to
Resurrect.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye, Dad.